Hello, friends. Steve Daly with you. You know, sadly, the nations of Russia and Ukraine have been in the news a lot lately with the Russian military invasion of Ukraine. And that began on February 24, of course. In today's video, I want to address some of the history of these nations in regards to the Mormon religion. To begin with, both of these nations are predominantly Orthodox in their background religiously. 71% of the Russian people are affiliated with the Orthodox religion, and 78% of Ukrainians identify with the Orthodox faith. Now, the atheistic government of the Soviet Union, which fell apart in 1988 to 1991, saw the emergence of new freedoms and, of course, the independence of many nations and territories, such as Ukraine. Ukraine declared independence from Moscow in 1991. Now, the Mormon Church claims over 11,000 members in Ukraine with 48 congregations around the country. There's one LDS temple in the capital of Ukraine, in Kyiv. The LDS Church established itself in Ukraine at the time of its independence, and branches or small congregations of the Mormon Church have been established in nearly every major city. The Ukrainians, prior to the coming of their temple there in Kiev, the Latter-day Saints of Ukraine would travel to Germany to use a Latter-day Saint temple there. But in Kiev, a temple was built in 2002. It was opened, dedicated, and it continues to be the only temple in Ukraine. But a temple was announced for the nation of Russia in 2018. Other temples in the area are also slated to be built. One in Budapest would be the closest to the conflict in Russia and Ukraine, not far from the temple in Kiev. Other temples coming to the area would be in Vienna, and up in the Nordic area, there's a temple announced for Oslo, Norway, and as well there is a temple announced for Belgium. Now, regarding the recent invasion of Ukraine, there was an LDS Church announcement on February 25th, the day following the invasion. It did not mention the nations involved in this conflict, but we can assume that it's referring to the war in Ukraine. The statement included the following sentiment: "We are heartbroken and deeply concerned by the armed conflict now raging. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has members in each of the affected areas and throughout the world. Our minds and hearts have been turned toward them and all of our brothers and sisters. We pray that this armed conflict will end quickly, that the controversies will end peacefully, and that peace will prevail among nations." Now, this statement reflects the difficulty that the LDS Church finds itself in regards to Russia. People want religious leaders to give moral clarity, to condemn those that start wars, and the LDS Church, though in this situation seems concerned about offending Vladimir Putin and the consequences that could have for their operations in Russia. The Mormons risk losing all their chances of getting a temple in Moscow or some other Russian city, and they also risk really the entire operation that they have in Russia. Once or twice a year, I have traveled to various Mormon temple openings. And when a temple was announced in Kiev, Ukraine, it grabbed my heart. A temple in an Eastern European nation was a new thing. There was a temple built in East Germany during the time of the Soviet Union, and that was quite a unique thing. But beyond the Temple of Germany, in the eastern nations of the Soviet bloc countries, there had never been a temple built by the Mormons. So Kiev represented the beginning of taking advantage of those new freedoms in Eastern Europe. I was excited to be able to be there for that and to be able to minister in Ukraine. When I arrived there, I believed I was only lending my support to an outreach that was going to be organized by local Ukrainians, Christians, in relationship to the open house at the temple. Instead, I ended up finding myself the leader of an outreach there for several weeks. Now, one young woman told me that I met outside the temple that she had traveled 11 hours to attend that open house and see that temple. It's hard to believe it could take that long to travel across Ukraine. But she had only been a member for 2 weeks, and it was so interesting to meet her and to realize the impact the Mormons were making in certain places there. She was already planning to become a student at Brigham Young University in just 2 weeks of being a Mormon. But during the time of the open house in Kiev, there were about 200 Latter-day Saint missionaries working in the country. And they were making quite an effort, especially because of the temple being there and being opened. I was able to speak with many of those missionaries. Most of them were Americans, so it was easy to speak to them in English. But along with Sasha, my translator, we were also able to distribute a lot of information to open house guests, and some great conversations were had with those Ukrainian Latter-day Saints and people who were just curious to see the temple. One of the best and most noteworthy conversations that we had was with a middle-aged professional man. He was so surprised and intrigued to find that we were there doing our work that he stayed with us for 3 hours, just asking us one question after another. He had been raised in an atheistic home, his parents being members of the Communist Party. So as far as religion goes, his only experience with it was the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He told me it was the Mormons who had taught him how to pray. Of course, being taught to pray, to speak to a deity, if it is to pray to an idol or a false god, is not actually a good thing. Religion in and of itself is not necessarily beneficial. We see in Proverbs 15:8 that the sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is his delight. It was wonderful to see that the great God, the true God of heaven, had made it possible for us all to come together that day in Kiev. Now, in late January, as the tensions have grown between Russia and Ukraine, and now it's an actual war, LDS missionaries have been removed from the area. They've been removed from Ukraine. Some missionaries were sent back home if they were nearing their release date. Others were moved to Moldova or to other European countries. In Russia, the missionaries from foreign countries have been removed as well during this time of tensions and conflict between these nations. Now, a word about the Mormons in Russia. The LDS website, churchofjesuschrist.org, does not list any statistics for Russia. This is probably due to the fact that they do not want to draw any negative attention from Moscow relating to any successes that they may have had. But other sources put the number of Latter-day Saints in Russia at over 20,000. I would guess that a number like that, we should probably consider it being maybe more like 10,000 that would be legitimate for those participating, actively participating in the Mormon religion. As many Russians sought renewal of spirituality in their lives in the 1980s, some responded, of course, to the missionaries of the LDS Church. In 1990, these Russians formed the first Russian Latter-day Saint congregation in St. Petersburg and in Vyborg. Eventually, other congregations were established across Russia. Yet the LDS Church's history with Russia actually goes back to Joseph Smith, who called Mormon missionaries of his church to Russia in 1843. Later, some Mormon church leaders visited the country in 1866. In 1895, the Lindlof family joined the Mormons in St. Petersburg, the first Russian converts to the Mormon Church. Now, LDS President Russell M. Nelson announced in 2018 that the LDS Church would build a temple in Russia, a major city in Russia. But all these years later, there has been no further announcement as to which city has been chosen or the address of this coming temple. It's possible that all negotiations with the government for the required permits have stalled. Nelson wants to go down in history as the LDS leader who did great historic things, like bringing a temple to Moscow, Russia, as well as he would like to bring a temple to Shanghai, which he has announced as well. But these communist nations, communist governments have a mind of their own, and they don't really care about Russell Nelson's legacy. At this point, the temples he has announced for Russia and China seem very unlikely to be built in his lifetime. When it comes to Russia, the LDS Church has to be very careful. So-called anti-terror laws were passed beginning in July of 2016. The law prohibits preaching, praying, disseminating religious materials, and even answering questions about religion outside of officially designated sites, church buildings. The Mormons have agreed to follow this restrictive law and since have referred to missionaries only as volunteers, who are now limited to service opportunities. In 2019, 2 LDS missionaries were arrested and charged with teaching English without a license. Also hanging over the entire situation is the knowledge that back in 2017, Russia banned the Jehovah's Witnesses, the other American religion that is known for its aggressive public evangelizing practices. Since then, Jehovah's Witnesses have had their homes raided and members have been sentenced to harsh prison sentences. The LDS Church does not want this to happen to their work in Russia or to their people. By mid-February of this year, all remaining foreign missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints were relocated to other missions outside of Russia. Please like, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments section below what you thought of today's video. And let's continue to pray for the people of Ukraine and of Russia. Thank you.